Come on. You know, we gotta pray. We gotta pray. We gotta pray. Pray for the world tonight. We gotta save somebody, save somebody tonight. Yeah. Fire in the air, what the hell going on? Sirens everywhere, singing that street song. Violence everywhere, barely holding on. What the hell going on? Do you know who you are? Do you know who we are? We're extraordinary people, living an ordinary life. One extraordinary question: gonna run or fight? So we gotta pray. Pray for the love tonight. Yeah. Another day. Pray for another try. Smoke is in the sky. What the hell going on? Bullets gonna fly. High right from the gun. Trying not to cry. Barely holding on. What the hell going on? Do you know who you are? Do you know who we are? We're extraordinary people, living an ordinary life. One extraordinary question: are we gonna live or die? So we gotta pray. We gotta pray. We gotta pray. We gotta pray. We gotta pray.
Good morning and welcome. Stanton Adams Consulting and the Diversity Institute and the Center for Global Inclusion welcome you. We're so excited to have you here today. And as people will begin to trickle into our workshop, into our session, we just want to get the housekeeping out of the way and all of those things out of the way because we have a very special treat for you today. We are speaking with Julie O'Mara and Dr. Joel Davis Brown, and they are here to help us understand the global diversity, equity, inclusion benchmarks. So hold on to your seats, folks, because this is going to be one heck of a ride. Before we begin, though, there's something that Stanton Adams and the Diversity Institute likes to do before all of our learning opportunities. Today we have our special friend, Lakeisha Kimbrough, with us, who will kick us off with a grounding and a land acknowledgement. So I'll pass it over to you, Lakeisha.
Thank you, Melissa. Good morning and welcome, beloved. I hope that this morning finds you doing well, finds you centering your peace and your joy the best way you know possible. Beloved, this morning, as we prepare to enter into this great opportunity for learning and growing together, I invite you to get comfortable, to do what your body is needing and asking to do right now. Perhaps you would like to keep your camera on or off, stand, perhaps stretch your arms. Beloved, I'm going to invite you to take one big inhale, really fill your lungs, and hold that inhale as long as your body asks, and then slowly release. Nice, slow exhale. Another nice big inhale, beloved. Nice, slow exhale. And as you are following your body's natural breathing rhythm, I invite you this morning to think about all the things that your body is holding and where you are holding them. Are they asking for release? Are your shoulders tight and tense? Are they hunched this morning? Perhaps you'd like to relax them or roll them. Perhaps a gentle sway as you follow your body's breathing rhythm, beloved. Nice big inhale. Nice slow exhale. Beloved, on your inhales, I invite you to think about all the things that you wish to call and bring to yourself during our time together today. Perhaps it's grace for self and others. Perhaps you're bringing with yourself permission to be as fully present as possible. That may mean I'm not going to check my emails during this time. I'm going to put my phone on silent. Beloved, on your exhales, I invite you to think about what you release or set aside during this time today that will allow you to really take in the full learning and growing that is gifted to us today. Nice big inhale, beloved. Nice slow exhale. Today, beloved, we acknowledge that we are engaging and learning and growing in community on Turtle Island, what we now refer to as the United States, the occupied sacred lands of our Indigenous siblings. I join you today, beloved, from Seattle, the occupied, unceded land of the coastal Salish peoples, more specifically, the land of the Duwamish. It is with deep respect that we honor and offer gratitude to the ancestors and elders of our lands, and we extend this gratitude to their descendants. In acknowledging the land and the peoples who have stewarded the land since time immemorial, we acknowledge the attempts of erasure through physical and cultural genocide and settler colonialism. We also acknowledge the resiliency and the beauty of the peoples and the land which continue to thrive and meaningfully shape our world. This morning, beloved, we stand with our Indigenous siblings in solidarity, holding our shared humanity as we intentionally work toward liberation for us all. Nice big inhale, beloved. On your exhale, I invite you to give audible release. So that may be a hum. It may be whatever your body does. Beloved, as we prepare to turn back over to Melissa, I invite us to hold these words and to think about what action based on these words looks like for us, that we move from acknowledgement into action. One more big inhale, beloved. Audible release. Thank you, beloved. I turn you back over to Melissa.
Thank you so much, Lakeisha. I so appreciate you and the work you do to help us to stay grounded and to acknowledge our ancestors and history. I am excited to be here with all of you this morning, and I'm so appreciative of each of you being here with us. So welcome to Revolutionizing Your DEI Strategy. I am Melissa Adams, and I am the Chief Operations Officer for the Diversity Institute. As many organizations expand their DEI strategy, many have critical questions. How does an organization know if its diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies will show results? How should systemic racism and other issues be addressed? And what does success look like? Also, how can progress be measured? Today, we're going to tackle some of these tough questions. And before we begin, I'd like to talk to you about something very important as it pertains to Stanton Adams and the Diversity Institute, as well as the business case for why this work needs to be done. So my name again is Melissa Adams with Stanton Adams and the Diversity Institute. And this is my business case for peer-reviewed standards and certification. So cases of COVID-19, total cases in the world as of September 2020, as of July, it started as of July, as of July 2020, we had 14 million cases worldwide. Right? And I'm sure that number's gone up. We can think about all of the civil unrest and the political problems that came out of George Floyd's murder and the murder of other unarmed Black individuals. We remember the storming of the Capitol at the beginning of the year. The challenge that we're seeing is that for decades, Black and Hispanic employees have reported feeling marginalized at work and being relegated to lower paying roles, even when their credentials qualify them for a higher level position. And it's not just the workplace where we see these disparities. We see it in healthcare, education, the criminal and legal system, child welfare, and even in the financial sector when it comes to finances. More major employers want to increase racial equity, but most are unsure how. We've done some research, and some of our responses that we've received from some of the people that we've researched. I want to ensure our teams and employees are able to thrive in an inclusive and equitable environment. But where should we start? We should be doing more, but how far, how deep is it appropriate for us to go? Lots of energy now, but how do we make sure that it's sustained? So all of these questions are questions that come from CEOs, leaders, diversity practitioners, and others in the industry who want to know, how can we make a difference when it comes to DEI? Part of the challenge is there are so many different organizations now that are trying to help us to get certified as diversity organizations. The Diversity Institute certification provides valuable and timely clarity on what committed employers should do, because we use the global diversity, equity, and inclusion benchmarks. So we compare your organization to other organizations and where you sit on the continuum. So as you learn about the benchmarks, you should be trying to figure out where does my organization fall in all of this? So 4 reasons why the Diversity Institute is best suited to lead this effort to help you recognize and understand the global diversity, equity, inclusion benchmarks, because of our combined years of experience. We have deep content expertise and thought leadership, strong partnership capabilities, and a global network of experts who help us. The Diversity Institute fills a void and offers unique value. So what's the rationale for using the GDEIB? Currently, there are no standards that teach diversity and gender and zero tolerance in racial equity, right? Or zero in racial equity. There's a lack of common frameworks to help companies think holistically. There's a lack of data and transparency. There's no ecosystem to drive and influence this action, and we need to drive for results quickly, given the size of the gap we need to close. Key DEIB certification features would be, we would use the GDEIB to rigorously develop standards for what good looks like. for racial equity will help your employers meet standards by meeting them where they are and intentionally structuring the standards to enable any commitment. Offer critical how-to support and call employers in, not call them out, call employers in with significant recognition and benefits that help with talent, recruitment, retention, training, and development. GDEIB certification will offer significant benefits. The Diversity Institute subscribers from public, private, nonprofit, and educational institutions will benefit from certified GDEIB practitioners. Even if you send your practitioners to the Diversity Institute to learn how to use the GDEIB, they will have measurable results. They'll help you to recruit talent and retain talent. It'll increase your bottom line, and it'll increase your investors and funders. So how it works: committed employers submit a plan that is approved based on rigor. They have up to 12 months to reach standard threshold, and we help you get there, right? So this is not a one and done. This is a journey that your organization is on to increase, right? This is performance assessed annually, and employer certified or continued plan approved status, right? Organizations that gets to level 1 or 2 will be bronze. Organizations that get to level 3 will be silver. Organizations that make it to level 4 will be gold, and organizations that make it to level 5 will be platinum. And I encourage you to pay attention to the GDEIB presentation and our panelists, so you can figure out whether being certified would be something that your organization would like to do. So without any further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. Oh, here we go. Sorry, lost my mouse connection for a second. Yeah. Come on. Hey, Olivia, can you take the controls from me? Can you stop me from sharing? And share your screen?
Yep, I'll do that right now.
Yeah, I kept my mouse died. The battery in my mouse died. Thank you, Olivia, you're the best. And you can also put me on mute, please.
You're muted, Melissa.
Okay, can you hear me now? Awesome. I apologize, folks. I forgot to introduce my host. Okay. My guest. Let me turn off this audio. So I'm super excited to.
No.
Here we go. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me? Oh, wonderful. I apologize, folks, for the technical difficulties. Without any further ado, I'll allow Joel and Julie to introduce themselves to you. Julie, Joel, please.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'm so pleased to be here. So Joel, how about I introduce myself, you introduce yourself, and then you toss it back to me. Okay. All right. So I'm Julie O'Mara, and I am a board member of the Center for Global Inclusion, and I'm also a co-author of the GDEIB, and have been since it started in 2006. My career began in corporate life with 2 different corporations, and then I've been a consultant since then. And in 2017, we actually founded the Center for Global Inclusion specifically to work with the GDEIB and other areas of education and research. So I've been devoting my time now with the center as a volunteer. I've written a couple of books. I'm learned a lot about diversity, equity, and inclusion over the years. I have a lot more to learn, but I'm thankful to my colleagues who have been teaching me so much, and very pleased at this time in my career now to give back. Joel, how about yourself?
First of all, I just want to say good morning, buen dia, bon dia, buongiorno, bonjour, dobre utro to all of my friends, wherever you might be tuning in from. I first want to just give thanks to Stan Adams for the invitation, the warm welcome, to Lakeisha for the warm opening and the grounding, for Julie for the opportunity to present with her, and to all of you for being here. I am based in the People's Republic of San Francisco, and my company is an organizational development firm based between San Francisco and Nairobi, and do many of the same things that you've heard have already been articulated. We're an organizational development firm, and our focus is on helping organizations to build more inclusive cultures. I think of more relevance to those of you who are in Minnesota. I went to school at the University of Minnesota. I also am licensed as an attorney in the state of Minnesota, and I also entered corporate America in Minnesota and learned some very difficult lessons. And the big reason why I started my own company is to help to create the type of environment that was different than what I encountered when I was working as a young professional there in Minnesota. What I would say to you in terms of the GDEIB, I've been an expert panelist now for about 6 years, helping to refine and to bring some greater rigor to these benchmarks. And so I'm really looking forward to having a conversation today, not just a lecture, and engaging you all and learning from you all and sharing some insightful information about this tool and this resource. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Joel. Okay, so it's now my pleasure to give you some highlights of what the GDEIB is. I feel like I could spend days talking about the GDEIB, so that's really not possible. So I'm going to hit highlights. We will have a Q&A session towards the end of our presentation. And so if you want to just jot down some notes about any questions that you want to ask or want me to elaborate on something, or Joel to elaborate on something, we can do that. So first of all, the purpose of this, of the GDEIB, is, and what we're really all about, is helping to ensure that diversity, equity, and inclusion work is done at the highest quality level possible. So that's our stated goal. I'm going to now just go kind of rapidly through. This is what we call GDEIB by the numbers, and it'll just give you a highlight of some of the features of it. And like I said, we'll go back and do a little bit more later. So first off, people have said, well, what is it? Okay, we know it's terrific. We know it's comprehensive, but what is it? So the what is a 91-page colorful booklet that's in a PDF format, and you can download it for free from our website. And one of the things we have in it is 3 ultimate goals of DEI. So this is general, this is around the world. So the first one is creating a better, equitable world for everyone. Advancing an inclusive culture, and improving organizational effectiveness. So those are our goals. The next number is, there's 1 triangle model. We'll actually show that in a little bit. 4 groups, 4 updated editions since 2006. Generally speaking, we are committed to updating this every 5 years, so it remains current for all of our users. There are 3 co-authors, myself, Alan Richter. He and I actually started this. And then for this latest edition, the 2021 edition, which I'll be talking about, we invited Nini Malifi from South Africa to join us. She's also an OD consultant, organization development consultant. There are 112 expert panelists. I'm going to show you a picture of them in a little bit. There are 5 levels. So this is called a maturity model. So what that means is that it gives you a roadmap and a pathway, and you go up those levels. So you may start out at level 1 or 2. And we hope at this time that that you're at least at level 3 and working your way up there. And then level 4 is progressive, level 5 is best practice. And this is, you have a different level that you're on for each one of the 15 categories. So the goal isn't just, one number, because some categories are more important than others, for your particular organization. So it's going to differ. We have 4 languages available: English, Spanish, French, and Portuguese. There's 5 approaches to doing diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And the GDEIB is suitable and works with all 5 of those approaches. In a little bit, Joel is going to lead you through an activity, and he will explain a little bit more about the approaches, and you'll do an activity related to that. There are 15 categories in 4 groups, as I said earlier. There are actually 275 standards for organizations around the world. So we use the word benchmark and standards interchangeably. And so this is a total of 275 standards. By now, you're probably thinking, oh boy, this is really, we like to use the positive word comprehensive, but we can appreciate the fact that there's a lot to it. There are 7 ways to use the GDEIB. I'm going to say at least. We have literally thousands of users around the world, and some of them are very creative and have come up with some very good ideas and good ways to use the GDEIB. So the first one is like co-creating the desired state of DEI in your organization. Some organizations say, we don't really know what we're trying to accomplish here. What do we want to accomplish? Not the activities, but what's the desired state? What do we want to accomplish? If you're already on your journey, it will help you in an assessment tool to understand what the current state is. Where are you now? It also is used to just engage management and staff in DEI. So it's an educational tool in that regard. It will help you determine short-term and long-term goals to measure progress. And this one, people have said, is a little unusual, to assist in hiring DEI staff and consultants. And what that's about is that actually looking at what the standards are, especially in levels 4 and 5, and then asking your interviewing questions around those standards, those benchmarks, to see if the person that you're interviewing it is a possibility and a good fit for your organization, given what you want to do. And just also to assess if they have the total scope and depth of the work. And some organizations also give it as a gift to other organizations in your community, other nonprofits or other government organizations. So that's very generous of them to do that. And then we have 68 sponsors. So the reason we're able to give the GDEIB for free is because of our sponsors. And I'm going to show you them in a minute. We have 20 quotes from users in the GDEIB and 33 questions and answers. And not in the GDEIB itself, but we sometimes call the GDEIB our guidebook. And then we have user tools that are also free. So when you see the activity that Joel leads you through, that's one of the free user tools, and we have several others. And we're working constantly on this. The thing that we really feel good about is that we feel that we've learned what works. So we've learned what works we learn a lot from our expert panelists, from the work that we do, and from our users. And the GDEIB is really the culmination of the 3 co-authors, the 112 expert panelists, and our many users and our sponsors. Our sponsors are very helpful to us. So I just wanted to show you a picture of all of our expert panelists. And by the way, that is spelled correctly. So panelists we use the global spelling and punctuation from the United Nations. So they have, it's really a combination of British and English and American English. And it's a little bit of this and a little bit of that. So you really have to know it. But panelist is indeed spelled with 2 L's. So here's pictures. I realize that they're small, but I think even though that they're small, you can see the diversity in our expert panelists. So they're from all parts around the world. Some are internal practitioners, and we use the title sometimes CDO, which means Chief Diversity Officer. There you can see, different genders, you can see different races, different ethnicities, and you can see that in the variety of pictures. We also have different generations, and then we have some that specialize in a certain aspect. Like we have one expert panelist that really specializes in compensation, and other expert panelists that specialize in other arenas. We have 3 of our expert panelists are blind. We have different sexual orientations, different gender identities. So it really is a diverse group, and I must say a really talented group, and I feel very privileged to be able to work with them. One of the things about being involved in diversity, equity, and inclusion work from our perspective is that it's very positive. That just warms my heart when I get to talk with the expert panelists. They spent most of the year, about 10 months of 2020, and each one of them volunteered and put in about, I'd say 3 or 4 days on the research part of this, and they remain an expert panelist for 5 years. So let me go to and talk about the sponsors. So you'll see from this particular slide, some of our sponsors. There were 68 sponsors for this past year. And I'm going to show you the 4 who we call the diamond level sponsors: AmerisourceBergen, Brown-Forman, Macy's, and Mass Mutual, who not only gave a considerable amount of money to us, which helped, but they're also very willing to share what they're doing and be a test case and help us out in many ways. This slide shows how the GDEIB has evolved. So it did start with some research in 1993 that was done by the Tennessee Valley Authority. We got permission from them to use the beginning of that work, and then we've enhanced it over the years. So you'll see that it started in 2006, and that was Alan and I. And the story behind why it started is that he and I were at a meeting, and we were bemoaning the fact that we thought so many organizations did not really know what, I know this is not good English, but they didn't know what good work looked like. And they thought that by running everybody through a training program and only doing that, or having employee resource groups and only doing that, or ethnic food in the cafeteria, or a career day, or celebrating, a certain designated month, there was a lot of thinking that that was effective work. Well, Alan and I said, there's more to it than that. And now, of course, you hear a lot about systemic diversity and making changes in your programs and systems and processes and that. So that is what really got us started with doing this work. So you see in 2006, it started with 47 expert panelists. And then each time we updated it or did a partial updated, we added additional expert panelists. So for the 2021 version, which was released in April, that's when we grew to 112 expert panelists. And we'll see what the next update brings. You also, Melissa and Cecilia asked us to talk about what are some of the notable changes from the 2016, which was the last full version that we had, to the 2021 GDEIB. So they're listed there. What we realized is that with this edition, the 2021 edition, that we wanted to dig a lot deeper than we had before. And also we were starting this, pretty much as COVID started. And we knew that the pandemic was changing the way many organizations worked. I mean, it was a drastic change when a lot of people just couldn't come into an office and couldn't be next to their peers. And, you know, we entered the Zoom era and that. So that was a significant change. We also had been watching and listening, and the whole emphasis on social justice just seemed to be increasing and becoming, well, it's always been important, but let's say talked about more and more. And then the other thing that's happening in our organizations and in our lives is that what we call the use of technology and the accelerated pace of change. It just seems we're just moving at rocket speed. And you are hearing and reading a lot about artificial intelligence, and particularly about possible bias in the algorithms that are used as part of how artificial intelligence works. And so there's bias in it depending upon who is really writing the algorithms and creating the artificial intelligence. And so it can have built-in bias in it. So one of our expert panelists has a really nice grant to look at gender influence in that, and the remote work, and then also psychological safety and responsible and ethical sourcing. Wellness has become more and more important with the pandemic. So we took a deeper dive in this new GDEIB. So before I go much further, I want to define what a benchmark is. And what we mean by a benchmark is it's an organizational standard of performance, usually stated as an end result or outcome. So let me just give you a couple of examples of what a benchmark is. So like, for instance, when you do training is an activity, but it's not really an outcome. I mean, you can say that, okay, we put, 2,000 people through unconscious bias training. That's great. But what we're focusing on is what was the desired, the end result or the outcome that you wanted to do with that training. Did it actually change behavior? Did that change behavior make a difference in the organization? So those are the kind of measures that we're looking at. Another example is that performance pay bonuses for promotions are tied to a variety of DEI measures. So you're building that into your performance management system. And another one is that the organization uses bold and transparent communications in naming, in dealing with challenging issues such as racism, sexism, homophobia, privilege, toxic masculinity, and white supremacy. So those are extremely important to us as well. So and the 15 categories in the 4 groups. The 4 groups are foundation, bridging, internal, and external. And you see the 15 categories listed here. And so we have about an average of about 20 or so benchmarks and statements in the 5 levels for each one of these categories. And, we take from driving the strategy, attracting and retaining people, aligning and connecting the various benchmarks, and then the external, which is where you really meet a lot of the business case. You get some of the business case in the internal, but a lot of it in the external category. And the next slide is this model. So this is just another view of the 4 groups and the 15 categories. But the thing that I want to draw your attention to is the dotted lines on the internal part of this triangle. And what that symbolizes is that these benchmarks, the categories, that they interrelate with each other. So for example, when you're doing recruitment, you also have to do communication around recruitment. You want to have the leadership involved in the recruitment. The diversity and the recruiting structure is important. So they all interact with each other. A lot of people will say, and we support this, maybe just starting off with a few benchmarks and not tackling more than you can handle. And what we caution about is like, don't forget some of these other categories that might, that might be important to you. So in closing with this part, if you want a quick fix, the GDIB is not for you. So it is, we did one of those word clouds, and the word comprehensive, this was with people who really knew the GDEIB well. And comprehensive came up as the largest word. So if you want a quick fix, GDEIB is not for you. And with that, I'm going to turn it to Joel.
Thank you. As I was looking at that panelist slide, it reminded me there are about 80 people in the world who I have not seen in 2 years. So thank you for that, Julie. As we said earlier, or as Julie alluded to, there are 5 different approaches to diversity, equity, inclusion with which the GDEIB is useful and compatible. And so you see some of those there. However, what I would also share with you all too is that the extent to which any instrument or tool has value is to the extent to which it can be applicable. And part of what we think will be helpful for you is to help you think about what your individual approach is and to understand and recognize what your individual approach might be to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and to see where there might be similarities and differences between your personal approach and that of leaders within your particular organizations. And so we're going to take you through an activity called Approaches to Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in just a short bit, where you'll be able to further understand where there might be congruence and where there might be some dissimilarity between your approach and that of leaders in your organization. But let's spend some time before we get to that activity talking about the different approaches. And so before you on the screen, you'll see that there are 5 different approaches, many of which I'm sure a number of you are familiar with, but it's important for us to articulate and talk about what those are explicitly, because sometimes when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, we can use the same words, but they can have a much different meaning. So let's talk about those. So for example, one of the first approaches, of course, is being in compliance, where you're basically focusing on adherence to rules and codes and legislation and regulatory requirements. The legal aspect is going to be very, very important. Okay, so that's one approach. And again, each of these approaches is important. No, I wouldn't say one is more important than the other. I think personally, if you're doing great work, you want to make sure that you're paying attention to all 5, but we want to help people to understand what their particular bent may be when it comes to this work. So the first, or one of them, is being in compliance. The second is advocating for social justice, focusing on achieving fairness globally. The third is building competence, where each person within an organization, each stakeholder becomes more competent and more culturally intelligent in how they think about diversity, equity, and inclusion. This next approach, or fourth, is honoring dignity. So I'm just going clockwise. And it focuses on, the spiritual, religious, or secular. We want to be inclusive with the language once again, recognition and interdependence of every human being, recognizing that this is essential to how we see each other as human beings and to affirm each person's humanity. The fifth aspect or fifth approach to diversity, equity, inclusion that many people may adopt and is something that's compatible with the GDEIB is just developing the organization and focus on how can you improve organizational effectiveness, efficiency, and performance. Now, as you think about these approaches, and one of the things that we're going to do in this activity, and I'm going to ask Olivia if you could please share this document with our audience, is we're going to give you an opportunity again to think about and to recognize what your individual or personal approach to this work might be, and where might there be similarities and differences with organizational leaders. And we're going to talk a little bit more about how this is important, particularly if you're using the GDIB. So in short form, you should get this beautiful form here that was designed by the Center for Global Inclusion. And what we're going to ask you to do, I just want to make sure that everybody has the document before I go forward. So, okay, gotcha. We'll make sure we weren't getting lost and whatnot. Okay, so everybody should have a link. You're going to click on the link to download it. The form is fillable. Okay, so we have partners behind the scenes who know what they're doing, because that's only something I've learned how to do recently. And when you download this, please make sure that you look for it in the appropriate folder. So it should be in your downloads folder, and then you probably want to save it to your computer. And if you can't download the form, then I think you can just pull out a piece of paper, and it should be pretty easy to follow through with the instructions I'm about to give you. Okay, so what we're going to ask you to do is the first part of this activity is to perform an assessment. So what does this mean? So we're going to ask you in the first to create a column and based on your own personal approach to rank which of these approaches most resonate with you on a scale of, let's say, 1 to 5, with 1 being the least resonant approach and 5 being the most resonant approach. So for example, if you really resonate with advocating for social justice, if that is the one approach out of all these approaches that is most resonant with you, it doesn't mean that the other ones are not important. It just means that this one is the most important for you. Then you would probably assign that a 5. And then you would rank and prioritize the other approaches based on your personal sensibility and your personal approach. So I'm gonna just give you a little time to do that. So it's part 1 of the assessment, ranking and prioritizing your approaches, your individual approaches to diversity, equity, inclusion. Which one is most resonant? That would be a 5. And then which one is least resonant as a 1, and then ranking them in between 5 and 1. So I'll just give you about 30 seconds to do that. And once again, feel free to be honest and candid. No one is going to check in. There's no right or wrong answer. And we just want you to be reflective and to use this tool to help you gain greater insight into how you approach this very important work. I believe the file has been reshared in the meeting space. And once again, just think about which of these is most important, or which one resonates with you the most, excuse me, and then just rank it from 5 to 1. Individual approach. Take another 10 seconds to do so. And if you don't have the form, you can just write it on a piece of paper. By the way, this form is also available on the website for the Center for Global Inclusion. And so if you are not able to use this form or to get access to the form today, you can go to the website, and all of these tools are free as long as you sign an agreement that's there on the website. So these tools are free for your use. Okay, thank you. So that was part 1 of the assessment, your individual approach or personal approach to diversity, equity, inclusion. Now there's a second part for the assessment. During the second part, what we're going to ask you to do is to think about your organizational approach and think about, with your organization, which approaches are adopted when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, or which ones, based on your knowledge of the organization, organizational dynamics, your conversations with the leaders, what are their approaches, okay? And so if you were to have a conversation with your leaders, or based on your experience, what do you know to be the approach that's most resonant for them? And we're going to once again ask you to rank these approaches based on your understanding of the approach taken by your organization. Okay, so once again, you're looking to the organization to see and thinking about what their approach is. So for some, maybe the organizational approach might be building confidence. For some, it might be being in compliance. For others, it might be developing the organization. So based on your knowledge of the organization, what do you believe to be their approaches and how they would rank these same approaches to diversity, equity, and inclusion? So take 30 seconds to do this, please. Again, if you're not able to access the form, please feel free just to write a piece of paper. If you download the form, please make sure you save it to your computer. Take another, let's say, 10 seconds. Okay, at this wonderful time, you should have completed both parts of the assessment. You should be able to see in one column what your personal approach is to diversity, equity, inclusion, how you rank these 5 different approaches: being in compliance, advocating for social justice, building confidence, honoring dignity, and developing the organization. And in a separate column, you should see results of how you assess the organization. Based on your knowledge of the organization, whatever organization that might be, what would you say is the organization's approach to how they approach diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how would they rank these same approaches? As you look at those 2 data points, if you will, of those 2 columns, what do the results of this activity tell you about, first of all, your approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion? And I would invite you all, because I like talking to people. I'm from the Midwest, so I like talking to people, whether it's virtual or not. I like to hear from people. So I would encourage you all to just share in the chat what you learned just by going through this exercise, first of all, and thinking about your own personal approach. So feel free to share that in the chat, and I'm going to read into the room a few of the responses from some of our friends who are here today. Okay. So I see from one person here, I think Tamina, please, I hope I am pronouncing your name correctly. He said legal and compliance right now is your number one priority given the stage of the journey. I also see someone saying it would be helpful to have another column for your teams. You can have as many columns as you would like. You can certainly modify this for your purposes. So if you want to focus on division, if you want to focus on team, you can certainly do that. Anybody else in terms of what you've learned just about your own individual approach? We'll just start there. There are a multitude of approaches to this work, and we all have a place in it. Absolutely. Okay, I'm just trying to make sure I don't miss anybody. Social justice is my number one approach. Okay. Anybody else? And like I said, please keep adding to the chat. One person asked, I wonder how our ranking is impacted by personal lived experience. That's certainly an interesting and fascinating question.
Joel, I'm just reading one too that says this is the first workshop which asks where, oh, I'm going to lose it, where the organization intersected with my personal approach. Thank you. And I think that really feels good to me. And because a lot of this work is so personal for so many people.
Okay. I also see that for one, Lovely, building competence is their individual approach. And then I also see from others that the focus is on developing the organization. Now, let's ask the other question, okay? Where might there be some similarity or contrast between your individual approach and that of the organization? And so I'm gonna scroll back up as I can. Let's see.
Mm-hmm.
So one person shares, and Sean, thank you. I learned what I've always known, that my organization is about checking the box, not so much into real work. And that sometimes certainly is a reality. I also see here from Shannon, my approach is pretty much the opposite of my organization. Yeah. Let's see. I'm just trying to make sure I'm getting a representative sample of what some of the comments are here. I love the question here by Denise. It'll be interesting to see how my CEO would fill this out. I also see here, let's see, from Cheryl. My approach is honoring dignity and developing the organization. Most organizations want to be in compliance or build competence. Okay. And Shanita says that their individual approach is in alignment with the organization. Great. And as I go down here, I'm going to go to Angie. Whereas I feel I can dig into social justice work right away, this helps me to understand all that the organization I work for is charged to do on a foundational level to ensure institutional equity and lay the groundwork. I'm glad you had that insight. Okay. And also I see from Ray, as a consultant, I work with organizations in different stages of this kind of development. Yeah. And Monica also shares too, and I think I'll just read maybe one more after this. Yes, identifying the gaps between your personal DEI drive and the organization DEI drive is so important. It's the difference between building bridges or burnout. That is such an important point. And Monica, I wonder if you can say more. I wish I could hear your voice, but I wonder if you could say more about what you said is the difference between building bridges or burnout. So you may not want to add any more context to it. I realize that typing this out may be a bit tedious, but I think you make an important point. I think there's a little bit more to unpack there if you so choose. Okay. All right. And so what would you say now that you have this information and now that you may recognize that there is some similarity between your approach as an individual and that of when you recognize or see the similarities or difference between your approach and that of the organization, what do you think might be the next step for you in terms of the work you're doing, either as a consultant, either as an employee, as a key stakeholder? What might be the next step for you in this work particularly after this exercise? I'm just curious. What might be the next step? So if, for example, you recognize that, as some of you have noted, that your approach is markedly different than perhaps leaders within the organization, what might be the next step for you? What might be the next action item, conversation that needs to take place? I would personally think that this is a good activity to take to your organizations to help to help build congruence, alignment, and to deconstruct what we mean when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think all of us would probably agree that what one person or one organization says with respect to diversity, equity, and inclusion can mean something entirely different based on the time, based on the audience, based on their sensibilities, based on their history with doing this work. Okay, so Denise says diagnosing the gaps to determine the next steps as an organization. Absolutely. Dan says, just lost Dan's comment. Working with leaders to revisit their priorities. Karen says, this is a great tool to ask my leadership to complete. Okay. And let's see. And I love what Bianca says. So I think I'll end here with this comment on this segment. Starting off on where there are commonalities. For example, I would focus on building confidence, since that ensures we're all on the level playing field when it comes to understanding the concepts of DEI. Okay. All right. So again, I'm glad you enjoyed this activity. We could spend probably half a day, a full day, maybe an entire week talking about this. And as I have indicated, this is one of my favorite activities here, because once again, it's important to deconstruct language and to make sure that there is alignment, and to make sure that there's also room for all of these approaches, because in truth, every piece of this, every approach that you see here on the screen is going to be vital to you having a successful and sustainable DEI strategy. Okay. Of course.
Another thing too, I just wanted to say that we often do this activity in small groups, so that people really share then to the degree that they're willing what they've come up with. And we find that that insight that the small groups further have from that discussion is very, very helpful. You know, and it's also a way to go deep pretty quickly if you're doing a workshop.
Absolutely. Thank you, Julie. And one of the things that's really important too, and I think we can't separate the work that we do from the world in which we live. And so right now we're obviously living in the end of 2021, and there's been a lot of discussion over the past couple of years, although we know that for many segments of our population, this conversation has been going on for centuries about how to address racial disparities. And in particular, I think it's important for us to talk about how the GDIB could be useful for addressing racial disparities. And so one of the questions I want to pose to the audience once again is, how does an organization know if its diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies will show results in today's sometimes contentious multicultural climate? I know that's a lot that we just put there for you, but again, how does an organization know if its strategies will actually deliver some results? How do you know? And I certainly have some ideas, but I'm not here to voice my opinion. I want to hear from all of you. How do you know? Because I'm sure many of you are getting calls and requests and seeing companies wanting to take action to address racial disparity. And how do you know that the work is actually being done and being done at a high level? What are you seeing? So Carol, my friend Carol says, set objectives with measures of success and review monthly or quarterly. Okay, thank you, Carol. I definitely agree with that. Jeremy says, we know we're making progress based upon an internal shared definition of success. I definitely agree on that. And this is one of the reasons why this insights and approaches exercise is so important. I'm going to come to Lanit. Says, feedback and input from the stakeholders, employees, and communities. I'm so glad you said that, because one of the things that I've said, in addition to some of the other things that have already been listed, when companies say, well, how do we know we're making impact? Have you talked to your people? Have you talked to, for example, various underrepresented communities who might have been targeted, who might have felt alienated, who might not have felt seen, who might be feel the brunt of certain disparities, to know what their impact, or what the impact is of what you've done? Is what you've done actually been relevant to what they're telling you is actually important? I'll give a quick example. I was working with a company and they said, well, we're doing some things around recognizing Juneteenth. We also, of course, are recognizing Black History Month. So in a caucus with some of their employees, their underrepresented racial minority employees, I said, is this what you needed? They said, well, it's a nice gesture, but it really isn't tied to what we wanted to see. We want to see something more focused on recruitment, retention, sourcing, community partnerships, leadership, et cetera, et cetera. So it's important to make sure that you're tying what you do to the actual needs and concerns of your constituents. Let's see here. Change in behavior. Thank you, Joseph, for sharing that. Are the salaries transparent, equitable, and competency-based? Nancy says it shows up in the numbers at all levels in the organization. And I would say, you know, there are a number of different things I look for, and I'm sure this is very consistent with what you all have shared. And many of you probably have other things that you would add to this list. You know, first of all, it depends on, are you creating sustainable impact? It depends on what you're hearing from your stakeholders. It depends on what you're doing as part of a larger strategic vision and plan. Do you actually have some key measures and metrics, and of course, you know, benchmarks for determining whether you've actually done the work? And so the second question that I have for you all, which is, how could the GDEIB be used to address institutional racism? Okay, how could this be something that has some great utility and something that you don't just walk away from this presentation thinking, well, that was nice. It's colorful, and they, you know, it has some different features, and obviously it's global in its reach and how it's been vetted, but I still don't know how it actually applies or will help us to deal with institutional racism among the other isms that exist in the world. How could this be useful? So I would love to, once again, to hear from the audience. And take some time to think about that. I just want to take time while people are thinking. I have a question from Zara, which we may just park until we get to the Q&A section. I'm wondering if, depending on which of the 5 approaches of diversity, equity, and inclusion people or organizations prioritize, are there some categories or standards that would be more relevant than others? I would think so. And I would say that based on the need, you probably want to focus on a few key categories. You may not want to focus on everything that might be too much. And for an organization that's just beginning their journey, you want to start in small, bite-sized pieces to make sure that you actually have a correct understanding of what you're doing, to make sure that you're not biting off more than you can chew, to make sure that you're not being too ambitious in what you do, because if you're too ambitious and then the work is not done well, it could kill morale, it could demotivate personnel, it could really undermine the very efforts that you're trying to take. And so I would say that, yes, you want to focus your activities and your efforts on what is most relevant and important for the organization, and particularly for your employees. Audrey, of course, says, you know, the GDIB can be used to address institutional racism by focusing on metrics. And Tish says, we are utilizing a co-creation approach with some of our priorities to ensure we are addressing and serving our employees in a manner that is meaningful to them. Love it.
Yep.
Okay. And let's just hear from a couple more people. Shannon says, maybe our organization will acknowledge the possibility that institutional racism exists. I certainly hope so. Bianca says, I think if the GDEIB is used to conduct a current baseline assessment of how the organization is performing, and then there is a strategy developed to address where staff feel we are performing at lower levels, and you have goals and clear deliverables, and then reassess using the GDEIB again in a year to measure progress. I think that's really important and really insightful. One of the things and reasons how I use GDEIB in my practice with our clients is, first of all, help with them to recognize that if you're focused on institutional racism, as an example, it can't just be focused on recruitment and retention. As we all know, just bringing people into an organization, if you've not really focused on the culture, will create a revolving door effect where people will come in and people will rush to get out. I think also helping people to understand that whatever work you do has to be, the DEI work has to be embedded in the norms, policies, and behaviors at every level of the organization. And sometimes people have a very myopic or tunnel view of what that is, but this helps them to be more expansive, and to use the word that Julie used before, comprehensive. The other wonderful thing about the GDEIB is that it establishes benchmarks, but it doesn't tell organizations what they need to do to get there. This is an adaptable, flexible tool where organizations can use whatever suggested practices that work for their culture, work for their industry, work for where they may be on their DEI journey to help them think about how they can get further along the spectrum. And so thank you for your conversation. Continue to think about this and continue to think about how this tool can be useful. And I'm going to pass it back to Julie to talk more about some specific case studies where this has been specifically applied with some of our partner organizations. Julie?
Thanks, Joel. And you know what I think I'm going to do? I'm going to just give a few key points about these two case studies that we have. And also let you know that you can read an article in our newsletter, just our recent December newsletter that's posted on our site. And so if you just navigate to news and scroll all the way down to the bottom, you'll see the December newsletter. And so both of these, there's an article on both of these that you can get more information from. So the first one is ERM. They're a 5,500 person consulting firm. They're in 40 countries around the world. They're one of our sponsors also, and very much interested in giving back. So the ERM stands for Environmental Resources Management. So they focus a lot on sustainability, health, safety, risk. They do some social consulting services and sustainability related services. And as you've seen, in the GDEIB, we have a category on connecting diversity and inclusion, diversity, equity, and inclusion with sustainability. And if you want to learn more about that, you can go to the United Nations site and just use the internet and find the 2030 Transforming Our World Agenda. And that talks about 17 SDGs, or Sustainable Development Goals. And I think it's very helpful for using the GDEIB to couple it with the work by the United Nations. I think that'll help. So one of the things that ERM found out is that they had done some diversity work mainly focused on gender. And then they learned about the GDEIB. And I appreciate so many people in the chat saying, I've never heard of this before. So that's on us. We are trying to get the word out as much as we can. So people do, I mean, it's being used by thousands of people around the world. You know, we're kind of a small organization, so we know we need to do much more. But anyway, this at ERM, they were focusing on certain categories, but not tackling other categories, because the diversity group didn't own those other categories. They weren't, you know, their organization was a little bit siloed. And so they stayed away from certain categories. And then after they were on their third assessment using the GDEIB, they finally got the courage to go ahead and meet with other departments, like in marketing or products and services, where this diversity group really didn't have any power or any clout or much knowledge either. But they showed them the GDEIB and the standards that applied to them. And and all of a sudden, people realize, oh, we're already doing this. We haven't told anybody. And, oh yeah, that's good. We should do this. You know, we haven't done this yet, but we need to. So it was a very positive learning assignment. And so what Neil Griffin, who is the head person who manages the GDEIB inside ERM, said that what they learned is that they really do need to get out there. They do need to tackle some of the benchmarks and standards that they hadn't done as yet. And they sort of let go of their "this feels too big for us to do" mentality. And I was very excited to hear that. So don't be afraid of the comprehensiveness of the GDEIB. So let me tell you, the second one is AIR. So AIR is the American Institutes for Research. And they are also, despite the name American, they are very global in scope. So they have about 1,800 people working with them, and again, from around the world. And what they've done is they've used the GDEIB now for about 5 or 6 years. And they started mainly with the foundation categories, which really is a good place to start, because those foundation categories really need to be in place pretty much. And so that's about your strategy, getting your leadership involved, and having a structure in place, like a diversity department, or a place where it's just housed in the organization that has some, I'll call them subject matter experts, or practice advocates, or that, to help other people in the organization know what DEI is, and that. So they really, and they have said in the past 3 years, they have engaged more and more people in their organization. And the big learning that they've had is the importance of that communication category. And I think that, we all know that in a vacuum, if you're not telling people, what you're doing and how this works, and educating people in that, then people feel like you're not doing anything. And maybe you're not doing anything, so that's why you're not talking about it. So, but you really do need to do, ongoing communication, and have places where people can go, because some people, want to learn about diversity, equity, and inclusion by reading or private. Other people want to learn about it in other ways. But that was one of their main things, was to do more emphasis on communication, and also to help. They have very high level, they're researchers. And so they want to dig deep. And so this was an important learning for them. So with that, I'm going to suggest that I see that there's so many questions in the chat. So I'm going to just, let's go to Q&A. Okay. So let's see. Well, there's a lot of, can we get the link to the newsletter? Yes, the 2030 agenda, you'll have to go to the United Nations site for that. It's very easy to find. Yeah. And hold on just a second. So yes, you can get these materials on our website, and they are for free. Joel,
Okay.
following the chat lately. Okay, Melissa,
Julie, don't worry. I got you for questions, okay?
Thank you.
We have been copying down the questions. We had a lot of great interaction in our chat. I'm so grateful for everyone attending. I think one of the first questions that came up was, are you able to share your PowerPoint deck?
Sure.
And I know the answer is yes. The other answer to that is, you can also go to the Center for Global Inclusion's website, and they have a lot of miscellaneous slides that help you to understand the GDEIB. Hang out on their GDEIB, hang out on their website, and you'll find a lot of great material and ways to utilize this tool. There's also an academic version. So if you are in the educational space, there's a specific version just for educators, for colleges and schools. So make sure you click on that one for your organization.
And Melissa, just one thing about that is that we have not yet updated that version. 2021. So we're talking about it. We're hoping to do it, but and the one we have on there is good, but it doesn't have all the updated information as yet. So give us about 6, 7, 8 months on that.
Yeah, and take your time. I think the tool as it is right now is still really, really good. It's a great tool. I think what Julie and the team are trying to do is add equity to that, which is always great. So here are some more questions from our audience. Someone said, I am at a global consulting firm that has a DEI arm, and no other DEI practitioner in the firm was aware of the GDEIB, nor were any of our corporate clients until I onboarded and brought it to light. It's such a powerful tool. How do we get it? How do we get the word out? How can we help you get the word out?
Social media, we weren't on social media for a while, but we are now pretty big. So you'll see us on LinkedIn and on Twitter and on Facebook. So, like us, share again, let us know, go to our website, share it, tell all your friends, your family, person on the street, anybody that you want. No, we really would. I mean, I'm serious. We really would appreciate that. Very much.
Yes.
Yeah.
I would
And
also add, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Melissa. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, and donate. You take donations.
Yes,
Your organization takes donations.
Yeah. I always feel a little awkward about the asking for money part. I'm getting over it. But yes, we do need sponsors, and that helps us a lot. In fact, on Tuesday, we now have hired a new executive director, Sudeep Mohandas, and he's just getting on board now. Yeah, but we were able to do that. Thank you to the sponsors.
The other
And
thing I was
Paul,
going to
go
add.
ahead.
The other thing I was going to add too is, there are a lot of tools and things that are being used out there in the world right now, and it can sometimes feel difficult to make sense of what's actually useful. Focus on the utility and the value of this tool. Don't just assume that people will understand its value just because you share it. Talk to people, use the tools on the website to help people understand how this can be a practical, applicable tool to what they do. I think that's the best way to get the word out about this. And so in a world where I feel like I'm being inundated every day with new things and new tools and resources, the utility of this is what sells it. So that's my insight.
Thank you.
Another question was, how many private and for-profit companies are using the GDEIB?
We don't give out, and we don't know exact numbers, but what we do know is that we have a circle graph that shows the percentages of areas and groups, and it's pretty equitably divided between large, private. A lot of people think, oh, this is just for big corporations. No, it isn't. We have many small organizations, nonprofit, government, a few in the military. It's pretty widely used. And the other thing that's very interesting is that we do support people customizing it for their industry, which is, you mentioned the higher education version. But one of the things that we've found out is people will start to customize it for their industry. A group will get together and decide to do this. And then, after a while, I haven't heard from them. And I say, hey, how's it going? And they said, oh, you know what? We decided that we don't really need to customize it, that what you have is, applicable in general. Nothing's gonna, organizations are very different, and they are also similar in certain ways. So, give it a shot. I know that there was a question earlier about unions. Yes, there are some unions that are using this. Again, we don't give out names of users and all that without their permission because, privacy issues and all that sort of thing. But, if you want to sign up to the newsletter, just go to the website. Up at the top of every page in the newsletter, and on the website, there's a yellow bar that you can use to sign up.
I would also say too that when you look at the motley crew of expert panelists, because we all look kind of corporate and may give off the impression that we're all coming from the same industry and whatnot, we're coming from a variety of different industries, a variety of different organizations all across the world. So this tool is informed by a number of different perspectives. And I just want to just stress that, because sometimes people can look at that and say, well, this is just adopted for-profit organizations. And in fact, there are a number of expert panelists who come from academic backgrounds. I myself am a professor as well. So there are a number of different industries and organizations that uses military as well, and government agencies. And so just want to make sure that we understand that this is a broad-based tool that's been vetted by people from a variety of different industries.
Yeah, I want to say a little bit about intersectionality too, is that a lot of times people will ask us, well, how many women do you have, and how many men do you have, and how many people in the United States, and how many this and how many that? We don't answer that because we've invited our expert panelists to be part of this for the totality of their lived experience and also the work that they do. And so, for instance, we have some people who are internal to an organization, but they don't really represent their organization. There isn't a slot for a certain organization or a slot for a high-tech firm. And that we look at people, we have some people who have had experiences in 3 or 4 different industries, and they bring wonderful insight to this work. And so the intersectionality is really important. And that's really, I think, simply said, the combination of our various identities that are important to us.
I also just want to add too, because there's a question there in the chat about, the trans community. There are a number of people, again, from a variety of different cultural backgrounds who help to vet this. I myself am a member of the LGBTQ community. So I am not trans, but I am certainly an ally. And I would say to you, we worked very hard, particularly between the last version of the GDEIB and this version, to make sure that we were using inclusive language and to make sure that this was brought up to progressive standards with respect to that community as well. We still have work to do, but this work was also informed by trans activists, trans leaders, and people who are part of the LGBTQ community.
Yes, it was. Yeah.
Oh, okay, great. Another question. Well, as you're on that point, Joe, I'll jump to this one. Will this webinar only address racial issues or include LGBTQ? Right, that was the question that Joe was referencing. And I also want to make a little note that I maybe should have said this in the beginning, in our conversation around diversity, equity, and inclusion, we see diversity broadly. Mm-hmm. When we say the word diversity in this session, it encapsulates age, race, gender, sexual orientation. It encapsulates your personality, where you're from, everything. Yeah. So I apologize for not setting that tone in the beginning, right? That when you all were referencing, and I don't want to speak for you, but I believe that when we are in agreement that diversity encapsulates everything, and it's a very broad category, and we weren't necessarily just talking about race as we were talking about diversity.
Not at all. And I would say, just because there's a particular sensitivity, obviously, not only in the US and North America, but the world around race and ethnicity. But obviously, we know that you can't talk about racism without talking about patriarchy, without talking about cisgenderism, heterosexism, ableism, and the like. And so it was just one reference. But if you were to talk to us next week and we did another presentation, we could focus on something completely different. So I just want to make sure that's very clear, that we were just using it as a reference point based on what's happened in the last 2 years, or actually the last 7 years with Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, there's been a very much an increased sensitivity around a lot of these diversity issues. In the definition, we have a series of definitions in the beginning of the GDEIB, and our definition of diversity mentions 25 different areas of diversity, and then it says "and others." And it's really interesting, because every time we've updated the GDEIB, we've really updated the language. Also changes around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and yes, we're trying to both lead and follow on the changes in the language and the sensitivities and where the interest is, and it very much differs around the world. Around the world, gender is still probably the most talked about, and it isn't necessarily gender identity. It's gender, and really that's code sometimes for women. But that is where the most of the global interest is.
Now we're on a global topic. We have a question. How well is the GDEIB used in the UK?
Oh, pretty, very much so. Yeah, and in fact, I think we have 8 expert panelists from the UK. And if you know DEI Leaders, Mark Baker's organization, several of our expert panelists work with him. And so the GDEIB is on the DEI Leaders website. Wow.
Farah Qureshi is also a noted UK leader who uses this extensively in her practice. And so it's growing for sure.
Yeah, and you almost be
also in Pakistan, and so, and what happens is that, one person is interested, and then it just grows and grows and grows.
Well, you almost be pretty proud of that, to have created a tool that is worldwide. It's global. It's the G stands for global, and it's very intentional.
Yeah, and it is global. And I also want to, don't let that
Scare
don't,
you.
yeah, don't let that worry you, because what we mean by global, it does not mean large multinational organizations, with offices around the world. Global to us means that it works anywhere around the world. So if you've got a corner grocery store, we have a publishing firm, very well known, Barrett Kohler, that has about 25 or 30 people, and they use the GDEIB. So you don't have to be huge to use it, because there's so many DEI interventions that we can do that really don't cost money, and people forget that.
I love the fact that it's free, that it's benchmarked, and that it was created by 100, and is it 192 now?
No, 112.
112 panelists, 112 experts created this. So when I take it in
three co-authors.
Yeah, and when we take this into our organizations, our clients, it really is relieving to not have to try and do a lot of this on your own, where you have the GDEIB to help you. A quick question here. I'm wondering if, depending on which of the 5 approaches to diversity, equity, and inclusion people or organizations prioritize, are there some GDEIB categories or standards that would be relevant more so to them versus others? So if you reach level 1, you have some things. What about if you reach level 3? Are there some different things?
No, I don't know how to answer that. The way it's constructed is that it's all woven throughout. All the different approaches and identities and all that is pretty much woven throughout. So I don't know, Joel, if you've got a better answer than I do on that, but it's not constructed exactly in the way that you say to find out.
I don't think I do.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think I do.
Okay.
I just want to also point out too, in terms of the global nature of this, I believe, Julie, tell me if I'm mistaken, most of the panelists now are not from North America. So there could be this impression that, well, this is global in the sense that, but it's still North American centered. And I would say it's not. And so I want to be very clear about that. This is something that's been vetted and crafted by more people who are outside of the North American context. And 2 of the authors are also not native North Americans. They're from South Africa. So that's also an important insight to this as well.
We have worked very hard at that to make sure that in this work, it's important to hear all the voices,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's our mode as well. And we strive very hard to listen. There's one thing to encourage the voices to be heard, but we also really listen to what they're saying. And the 3 co-authors, we haven't brushed off anything. There are certain things. Now, I don't want you to think that all these 112 expert panelists agree with everything, okay? So this is a consensus model. And so at the end, when we're all finished with this, we say to everybody, okay, if there's anything that you can't live with, then don't put your name to this. Thank you very much, but you don't need to put your name to this. And I think that we strive to be very respectful. We're also very proud that it's accessible, that we have an accessible version and that sort of thing. So, and we still have a lot of work to do. So,
yeah. And I think part of this question is that as we talk about our approaches to DEI, compliance versus social justice, right? Whether the GDEIB would have certain standards that would be relevant more so, like if I'm in a compliance mode, are there certain standards that I should be looking at? And I don't think that's how the GDEIB works. The GDEIB, you basically go through an assessment and you answer questions about your organization. Whether your organization is in compliance or social justice, that necessarily doesn't matter as you're answering those questions. Those
That's
are two different things. Am I correct, Julie?
Yes, you're correct. The interesting thing about the approaches is that sometimes organizations are biased, or sometimes they're even disrespectful, of some of the approaches. And I mean, some of the I'm going to try not to tell stories out of school, but around social justice and compliance. I mean, there's many people who will badmouth the people who work in the compliance arena. But I mean, I heard you say earlier, and Jolie, I mean, you said it's a very important component for this. And so, I mean, there are some of us, I mean, for me, I'm social justice and organization development. So the business case and all that is very important to me. And I try really hard to be respectful of all the other approaches, even though I don't choose that for myself in my work. But I try very hard to be respectful. And so many people have really thanked us heavily for the approaches, because they then can see there isn't one way to do this work.
Yeah.
And I would say in honoring Roosevelt Thomas, who was a pioneer in this field, that a diversity mature approach is going to incorporate all five, not just one. And if you're focusing just on one, then that's more of a diversity immature approach. And so you want to be balanced. You want to make sure that you're not ignoring something or ignoring a particular approach, and that you're creating space for all the approaches to be brought to the table.
Yeah.
I
And
appreciate
more than
you.
just ignoring, I mean, some people really diss them, I mean, it's been badmouth the other approaches, and
Yeah.
that, in my view, is not helpful.
Well, I want to say thank you to both Dr. Joel Davis Brown and to Julie O'Mara. You both were great presenters today. I really learned a lot myself, and I'm excited for January to continue the work we're doing. I'd like for you to take us out, Cecilia.
All right, so whoever is the host, if you can give me screen privileges. Oh, I know some. Ooh.
Don't worry about that. I got you. I'll give you screen privileges.
Love to share a couple of new things that are coming out in the next couple of months. So please visit www.stantonadams.com, www.stantonadams.com, and you'll see our new classes. I'll be rolling out a new class called the Art and Science of DEI, and I'm really looking forward to this. It's a 6-week class specifically for diversity practitioners and those who want to launch their career in the space. In it, we're going to discover things like race, gender. We're going to talk about, how to apply the GDIB, the GDEIB, as well as have the exercise that we did today. We're going to do a deep dive into that and really talk about aligning the organizations that you're working with your values, or actually trying to figure out what the best strategies are for those organizations. So definitely check us out at www.stantonadams.com. And thank you so much for coming today. And we hope to see you at a future event. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for being here with us. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Dr. Joel. Have a great rest of your day, everyone. I will be on for a few more seconds. If anyone has any time, we can hang out and ask more questions. I don't know if you two have time to stay another 5 minutes.
I can stay.
Cool. Okay, so if you have more questions, just shoot them out here to us, put them in the chat, and we will definitely be answering questions. There's some folks saying thank you, all the wonderful panelists. I really appreciated this session with gratitude. Thank you. Peter Drucker says, culture eats strategy for lunch. As a diversity strategist, how can GDEIB help me not have my corporation's culture eat my EDI strategy?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm having this conversation actually right now with a client. And what I would say to you is that once again, the GDEIB does not prescribe how you reach particular benchmarks. It gives you flexibility so that you can adapt it and adopt it to your particular culture. There are going to be many things here that you may be tempted to focus on and to address. And I would say take a piecemeal approach and focus on where the need is and what the focus might be, but also use this as an opportunity to help people to lean into this conversation where they can think more expansively and globally about how they're doing the work. So again, this can be modified, this can be adapted to fit your company's approach and sensibilities. How you get there is less important, and then the fact that you get there, whether that's the levels 3, 4, or 5. So that's what I would say to you in terms of making sure that the culture doesn't eat the strategy.
That's a great one. Let's see what else that we have in here. Register, love the Minnesotans, just keep the snow and ice away. Thank you all. This has been really enjoyable and very helpful. Gives me some hope for our organization. This was amazing. Thank you. Thank you, Melissa and Cecilia. Thank you, friends. Keep doing the work. We need you. They just sent you a LinkedIn request to one of you. Thank you for a wonderful event. I will help sing the praises of GDEIB. Well done to all. You can see the passion and vision behind this. Mm-hmm. Wonderful, wonderful. I think we have lots of great energy. Appreciate your willingness to share the strategies and tools freely. Many thanks. Thank you for this. Are you able to duplicate this live presentation to members of our insurance association? Reach out. We'll definitely try to get Joel and Julie together for you in case it will make sure their schedules can do it, but sure. Hopefully reach out.
Yeah. Feel free to ask us almost anything. Okay.
Yeah.
No guarantees, but feel free to ask.
Yes, wonderful. Thank you. And the great thing is, Vanessa, I just reached out to Julie and spoke to her about coming and doing the event for us. So if you'd like for Julie and Joel to come, you can reach out to Julie. If you'd like for all of us to come, the Diversity Institute and the Center for Global Inclusion, reach out to Olivia and we'll make it happen for you. We appreciate each and everyone. How do you measure behavior change after a DEI training?
Oh, well, you have to do more than just the training. I used to be, full-time in the training and development field, and I was actually president of the American Society for Training and Development, now called ATD. But training is tricky because you really need to work with the supervisors or the managers of those being trained. Because one of the things that is of great concern is a lot of times people will go to a really wonderful DEI session and they come back to the job and the manager says, well, that was a nice day off. Now let's do the real work. So you've got to make sure that this is what we mean by a system, that everyone is clued into the importance of the training. And then you can measure the behavior change by doing pre and post work on what you're training them for, to see if they can really do it, and if they do it. And behavior change is measured a lot through observations. It's not really hard. It just can be involved because there's so many areas that you need to look at, but you cannot ignore the supervisors. And then of course you need to make sure that the training is applicable to what it is that people are doing, that it's not too theoretical, that people don't know how to apply it. So they really know how to, what does the changed behavior look like?
Well, folks, I'm sorry. Those are all the questions we have time for today.
Okay.
But what I will do is we will download the questions, and we also will be sharing this video. We'll download the questions and we'll try to reply to you through email if you left a question in the box. Thank you so much for being here with us and staying an extra 5 minutes. You are the best. You really love diversity, equity, and inclusion, just like the rest of us. So have a great rest of your week. Have a good weekend. Thank you, Dr. Joel Davis Brown, and thank you, Julie O'Mara. You both were great, and I just so appreciate you. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Take
making-
care. Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.